Good evening. Good evening and welcome to the 2012 Human Services Candidates Forum. My name is Peter Tyson and I'm the president of United Way of Whatcom County. We're one of the sponsors for this year's event. And before we get started, I'd like to recognize the other sponsors and planning committee members. First, we have Mike Cohen from the Bellingham Food Bank and Anti-Hunger Coalition. Mike, are you here? No? Gib Clark from Interfaith Community Health Center. David Webster from the Opportunity Council. Out front, okay. And the guiding light behind this event is Sherry Emerson, also from the Opportunity Council. Sherry's in the back there. We also would like to acknowledge the City of Bellingham for providing the venue for this forum. And BTV 10 is here tonight, and they're broadcasting this forum live, and there will be a recorded forum available on the city's website at www.cob.org. We've hosted forums like this in the past to provide public and candidate education, the first one in 2003. Tonight's format will follow the pattern that was generally established during those earlier events. All the questions have been formulated in advance by a committee of human service professionals based on available data and trends in our local area, along with some best practices from other communities. Candidates have not been provided with these questions in advance. There will not be questions from the audience during tonight's forum, but candidates at their discretion can stay in the venue after their time at the podium to meet with the audience and discuss the issues. We just ask that those conversations happen outside of this room if sessions are in progress. Tonight the candidates are going to appear by race, beginning with the state legislative races in the 42nd District, followed by the state legislative races in the 40th District, and finishing up with Bellingham Proposition 1. Each candidate will be given the opportunity to make a 2-minute opening statement. Our moderator will then pose prepared questions, and the candidates will have an opportunity to give a 1-minute response, and if needed, a 30-second rebuttal. At the end of each featured race, each candidate will give a 1-minute closing. Candidates will receive their time cues from our timekeeper, Gib Clark, down here in the front, and we've got a 15-second warning and a 5-second warning. And we ask for your help from the audience to keep us on track. So we ask that you hold your applause to the periods after the candidate's introduction and then at the end of each race's block of time. This will allow the candidates to be fully heard and for us to all get home on time. And if you have a cell phone, we also ask that you mute it now. A moderator for this evening is Dr. Trula Nicholas from Western Washington University. Trula has been a resident of Whatcom County for over 30 years. Currently, she is the associate professor in the Human Service program at Western Washington University. Prior to this, she worked in the human services field and a variety of positions throughout Whatcom County. Trula also serves on the steering committee for the Whatcom Council of Nonprofits. She's on the board of directors for Washington Nonprofits, and she's a graduate of the Leadership Whatcom program. She's been married to Tom Nicholas for 33 years. They have a lovely daughter, Amelia, who's currently living and working in Seattle. So at this time, I'll turn this over to Dr. Nicholas.
Thank you, Peter. Our first candidates tonight are running for the state representative in the 42nd Legislative District. Can we have Mr. Vincent Buys and Mr. Matt Krug please come to the stand? Welcome, Mr. Buys. Welcome, Mr. Krug. The first question, and we'll start with Mr. Buys to answer first. The next question will start with Mr. Krug. The first question. We know that more and more families are struggling to meet basic needs of affordable food, housing, and health care. Visits to food banks are becoming more frequent. Increasingly, large numbers of families are paying more than they should for rent and there are more and more people who are uninsured or underinsured. Based on this information, what is your general philosophy of government's role and responsibility towards addressing these issues? Mr. Buys.
Well, thank you. We're going to do a 2-minute opening statement?
For the particular, oh,
Yeah, we forgot about the I wanted to hear it.
thank you. Then let's have Mr. Buys do his 2-minute opening statement. And then
All
Mr.
right.
Krug.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming. Thank you for taking your evening out of the lovely rain that we're experiencing out there, the lovely fall weather. My name is Representative Vincent Buys, and it's been an honor to serve you for the last 2 years, working down in Olympia to make Whatcom County a better place to live and to work. I've spent the last 2 years really focusing on what I can do for Whatcom County. I serve on the Agriculture and Natural Resources, so I've been able to be involved in what's going on with our farmers and our ag community here in the county. We have a large and a huge and a very important agriculture industry here. I also serve on the Business and Financial Services Committee. There we deal with a lot of the banking and financial services, the insurance products, but we also deal with a lot of licensing issues, helping businesses work through their licensing problems or other issues that they have. And lastly, I serve on higher education, which I think is very relevant for us today, because oftentimes education is one of those driving factors that leads to being able to get a better job and a better lifestyle. And I see a lot of college students here, a lot of Western students. Thank you, welcome. I appreciate you being here. I remember you were all here last year, or many of you, and it's a great group, and I appreciate you taking the time. So one of the things that we've been focusing on with higher education is how do we make it more affordable, and how do we make tuition rates more predictable. One of the things I've really been pushing for in that to make it more affordable is when a college student comes in, let's make sure that they know what the cost of their tuition is going to be over the 4-year term or 5-year term that they're going to be there, allowing them that certainty that when I come in as a freshman, I know how much I need to raise over the summers, and I know how much my tuition is going to be at the end of my schooling. That, I think, helps everybody in preparing for their education, but also making sure that they have the necessary resources to make it through.
Thank you, Mr. Buys. Mr. Krug.
Hi, my name is Matt Krog. I'm running for state representative. In my day job, I work to protect water quality, to make sure that waterways are swimmable, fishable, and drinkable, so that when you catch a fish, and you have to worry about it being poisonous, which for a certain subset of our society is a critically important health issue. I came here 20 years ago for Western, like a whole lot of other folks, and I got my undergraduate and my master's degree both from Western. And in the ensuing 20 years, I'd become a homeowner, a husband, a father, a business owner. But as a father, I'm especially proud to be standing here today because my daughter just graduated from Bellingham High School, and she went through the entire K-12 system in Bellingham schools, and she had a great experience. And I believe that every kid in our society deserves that same quality of experience. And just a few weeks ago, we moved her into the dorms up at Western. We have a new Viking in the family. And Mr. Buys spoke to the predictability of tuition, and I'll talk about the size of tuition. Right now, the amount of tuition that she's paying, or over the 4 years, is just slightly less than the cost of the mortgage of our first house. I believe that every kid going through our system should have access to a technical, community college, or higher education that they can actually get into an entry-level job and not drag tens of thousands of debt with them. Finally, it's so important to be here for social services tonight, and one of the things that I think we need to take a look at as a society is look at social services as an investment instead of a cost. Every dollar that we put into early childhood education, into nutrition, into health maintenance is an investment. We actually get that money back. We can't afford to be penny wise and pound foolish when it comes to social services. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Krug. Mr. Buys, I will read the question again for you. We know that more and more families are struggling to meet their basic needs of affordable food, housing, and health care. Visits to food banks are becoming more frequent, and increasingly large numbers of families are paying more than they should for rent, and there are more and more people who are uninsured and underinsured. Based on this information, what is your general philosophy of government's role and responsibility towards addressing these issues?
All right, thank you for the question. Government does have a vital role in making sure that we address the needs of our most vulnerable. One of the things that we've continued to do, however, is we continue to expand what we consider the most vulnerable into people that may not necessarily have the intimate or the vital needs. And what we do in that process then is we water down the resources and we spread them so thin that they can't even help the people that they're intended to help. We continue to open up programs to more and more people, and then the people that are truly the most vulnerable are mentally disabled, are physically disabled, the blind, the deaf, the people that are constitutionally required as a state for us to take care of. Unfortunately, then we lose the ability to care for them, and that needs to be the most vital thing. We need to focus our priorities on truly the most vulnerable.
Thank you, Mr. Buys. Mr. Krogh, would you like me to repeat the question?
No, thank you. Thank you for the question and the offer of repetition. I think what we do to take care of our most vulnerable is in large part why we have government. Right now, just to quote Mr. Obama from Tuesday night, capitalism is one of the greatest engines of prosperity this world has ever seen here in America. And he's right, but it's also turbulent. And when we have the ups and downs of our economy, we will always have increasing and decreasing different sizes of communities of need. And we have to make sure that when it's time to help people, we're prepared to help people. That's a large part of what we do. When we look at the costs of not helping people, when we look at our healthcare issues, when we look at using the emergency room as a vital source of daily care for people, it's an expense. It's something that we actually have to make sure we invest in each of the different things that takes care of people up front, make sure that we head problems off before they arise. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Krogh. The second question you will respond to first, Mr. Krogh. And even before that, let's give Mr. Buys a chance to give a 30-second rebuttal.
Thank you. I think one of the problems that we have to address going forward and looking at our social services program is in DSHS we have between 10 and 25% of waste or fraud, and we really need to address some of that. The first session in 2011 when I was down there, it came out that the EBT program was sending out about 22,000 replacement EBT debit cards that were either lost or stolen. That represents a lot of fraud.
Thank you. Mr. Krogh, 30 seconds.
No one disagrees that there's a need to get rid of waste and fraud. The question is whether or not we actually have an unnecessarily expanding group of people who need help. And my answer is no, we don't. Everybody I know wants to work. Everybody I know wants to take care of themselves. People are not becoming dependent the way that people, I say there are rumors out there of a dependency culture, and I don't believe it's true.
Thank you, Mr. Krogh. To the second question. Currently, our state and federal preschool programs for disadvantaged children, for example, Head Start and the Early Childhood Education Assistance Program, serve about half of the eligible 4-year-olds in Washington state. The Early Head Start reaches only 3% of all eligible 1 to 3-year-olds in the state. Do you believe it's a priority of government to ensure that all children have an opportunity to participate in high-quality early childhood education programs? Why or why not?
Absolutely. I think it's one of the most important investments we can make. Children who actually have the opportunity to have early learning opportunities thrive. We have less chance of going to prison. We have less chance of later life problems as long as we have decent early childhood education. Absolutely, I think it's one of our priorities. Washington State, one of the Race to the Top recipients, has the opportunity right now to work with the Department of Early Learning, with the OSPI, to make sure that we actually have programs in place for everybody.
Thank you. Mr. Buys, would you like to hear the question again?
Oh, we're good. I think childhood education, early childhood education is very vital, whether that comes in the form of a state-run program or whether that comes in a preschool program, or more importantly, what I think is the best education for a child is that they're left at home with the family, with the mother or the father. The first 5 years that a child is with the mother, it's the most vital in their lives, that they're with the family. That is where we need to make sure our children are. I recognize that that's not always a possibility because there's a lot of mitigating circumstances that don't allow that to happen. But rather than using that as the excuse for why we need to create more early childhood education programs, I think we need to address the reason why oftentimes in society there aren't the opportunities for those children to stay home. And that's one place that we can really make a positive influence in our children.
Thank you, Mr. Buys. Mr. Krogh, 30-second rebuttal.
I would say that those are not excuses, but they are precisely the reason why we need to make sure that everybody has a government program with access to early childhood education. In our economy today, we more often than not have two working parents. People need to be able to work. We need to be able to get out and make money for our families. And if we can have a place for our kids where they're actually getting the care they need, that will only benefit us all.
Thank you, Mr. Krogh. Mr. Buys, 30-second rebuttal.
When we look at early childhood education as an investment, yes, there is money to be made out in the workforce, but I think that it's a much better investment to be investing that time in children.
Thank you, Mr. Buys. The third and final question, Mr. Buys, you will respond first. Currently, 25,000 people in Whatcom County lack health insurance. What do you see as the major difference in the way that you versus your opponent sees the government's role in providing health care for children and family who are very low income?
Well, since we've never had this question before, I don't exactly know my opponent's position on it, but my position is that we definitely have a role to play in making sure that the most vulnerable in our society have access to their health care. But the best way we can do that is to create a vibrant marketplace for it, and also to create a vibrant environment for businesses to thrive. Because if businesses are able to thrive, people are able to get employment, which means they're then able to afford the health insurance products that they need. If people are working, then they have the resources necessary. But we do have to make means for those people that are unable to see their to get employment, and that's where the state is able to step in.
Thank you, Mr. Buys. Mr. Krogh, would you like to hear the question again?
No, thank you. I think we need to decouple employment from healthcare. When we talk about the needs of children, when we talk about the needs of families, I don't see a good reason to make all of our healthcare, as it for the most part exists today, dependent on your employer and your relationship with that employer. We, as a society, again, we have people who are very much in need, and the costs of not taking care of people when they actually have real problems are much higher than the costs of dealing with them at the beginning. So yeah, I think that for those 25,000 who lack health insurance, it's incumbent on us both morally and fiscally, in a fiscally responsible sense, to take care of people when they need it.
Thank you, Mr. Krogh. Mr. Buys, 30-second rebuttal.
I think it's obviously very necessary that we provide for the low income, and that's where I appreciate the services that we have here in Whatcom County. The Opportunity Council they provide, I've been able to go out to the clinic and see the work that's provided there here in Whatcom County, and it's a great opportunity. We need to make sure that the most vulnerable in our society are cared for. But there too, again, if we can get people employed, that's the best way to get them their health care.
Thank you, Mr. Buys. Mr. Krogh, 30-second rebuttal.
Well, I will disagree on employment being the best way to get their health care, but I do agree with Vincent that making sure that we have a prosperous community that people can actually afford to live in, where we can actually support ourselves, is an absolutely critical function of government as well. And whatever we can do to make sure that we invest in our local economies and bring people up, that's important.
Thank you. Now we have a 1-minute closing for each of the candidates, and we'll start with Mr. Krogh.
Again, my name is Matt Krogh, and I'm running for state representative, and thank you to the Opportunity Council for being here. I do think that we have very stark differences in governmental philosophies between these two candidates, by which I mean the two of us. And I believe that we have actual moral obligations that we as a society should be trying to fulfill, and those things reside in our social services and in our education. It's why we have government, it's what we do, in addition to encouraging prosperity. So if you like those ideas and you like those answers, please vote for me, and voteformatt.us is my website. I hope to see you there.
Thank you, Mr. Krogh. Mr. Buys, 1-minute closing.
Well, thank you. Once again, it's an opportunity to come and speak with you tonight, and it's been an opportunity and an honor to serve you the last 2 years. I look forward to serving you the next 2 years, and I really believe that government's role is vital in protecting the most vulnerable. But the best place for the most vulnerable to be taken care of, and the first stop that we should be going to, is our communities, is our families first, our communities second, and then to government as the final safety net. And unfortunately, that role has been kind of reversed, where the first place people go for their assistance is to government. And that has really hurt, I think, the family and the community relationships that we have. And it's prevented people from really experiencing that community and oftentimes getting back into good relationships with their families. So while I do support the role of government, I believe that community is the best place to seek that support. I look forward to serving you again, and I ask for your vote. My name is Vincent Baez. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vise. Mr. Crow.
Thank you.
Next, we have Ms. McClanahan, who's running for the State Representative, Position 1. Would you please come to the podium? I'm going to say. Am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Didn't sound right.
Can you?
McClendon.
McClendon. Ms. McClendon's opponent, Jason Overstreet, could not be here tonight.
Should I go ahead and start?
Ms. McClendon, you have a 2-minute opening.
Thank you. Thank you for all coming. My name is Natalie McClendon. I am running for state representative in the 42nd Position 1. I am a former teacher. I taught here in Whatcom County. Went back to school in midlife and taught at Timber Ridge High School, the alternative school for the county, many of the county districts for some years. Great experience working with kids from all over the county and learning about their trials and their troubles and their difficulties, because these were kids that were pretty much had one foot out the door because they were not being successful in school. I am also a small business owner. My husband and I have supported ourselves for the most part for the last 20 years with a small photography business here in Bellingham. And our income has seen the ups and downs of the economy, and we've learned very well to be very nimble and to make sure that we to stay ahead of whatever new trend is coming up. Photography business has been extremely volatile, and as you well know, most of you have a pretty high quality camera in your pocket, and that has impacted our business a lot. I see the role, the challenges that we've had as small business owners as a really important skill and experience to take to the legislature, in that we are constantly having to look at the trends and to be proactive about making sure that government serves the purposes that we want. And to...
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Mrs. McClendon. The first question. A recent study from the USDA found that despite our gradual economic recovery, hunger in Washington remains at an unacceptably high level. We are ranked the 14th hungriest state in the nation. What is the role of government in helping low-income people meet this basic need? And what role should the private sector, such as charitable organizations, play in feeding hungry families?
Food is probably the first and the most immediate need that we have. And if I can't imagine being a parent not being able to put food on the table for a child. I've been lucky in my life, even though we have had times where the budget was thin, that we were always able to do that. I think it's vital, the food stamp program that the federal government runs, that we have that, and with partnerships in the community with food banks and private donations to supplement the amount of money that amount of food that families can buy on food stamps. We need to do it all of the above, to make sure that people are not hungry.
Thank you for your response. I'll move on to the next question. According to the Gates Foundation and other experts, The first 5 years shape a child's life. Public investment in early learning can prevent serious negative outcomes, including poverty and incarceration. What is government's role in providing early childhood education for our community's families?
We need to look at early childhood education as an investment, a vital investment, because we hear a lot about making sure we don't spend too much money. The government needs to pay its bills and not go into debt. Investment in things like early childhood education is one of those basic investments that we can do to save money down the road. As you said, for incarceration, for remedial education, just the matter of being able to be successful in school and be ready for the workplace. If we care about a vital economy, we need to invest in early childhood education.
Thank you, Ms. McClendon. The third and final question for you. The upcoming regular legislative session will be a long session focused on the state's next biennium budget. What efforts do you support for balancing the budget if we face another substantial revenue shortfall? Can you tell us specifically what programs or services you would recommend funding first and protecting from further cuts?
Well, first of all, I'm crossing my fingers we won't have an additional shortfall. The revenues have been increasing slowly, but they are on the upswing. One of the things that the legislature did in the last session was to package up some shovel-ready infrastructure projects that had been put on hold because of the recession, and floated bonds, bringing in private money to be able to put people back to work right away. And this bill did pass, and it was able to do what it did. What it was intended to do was to put particularly construction workers back to work in our communities locally where they brought in money. I mean, they spent money in our communities and built the economy. My opponent voted against that bill, one of the few
Thank you,
who
Mrs.
did.
You now have a 1-minute closing statement.
I've been really having a good time on the campaign trail, talking to lots of people at the doors. The economy and education are probably the two most important things people think about, bring up when I'm talking to people. We have to work across party lines to find real solutions to mainly it's all budget. It's whether we are able to adequately fund education, whether we are able to adequately fund the human service programs that you're all vitally interested in. We need common sense solutions, investment in our communities, in our families, and our children to make our communities better for the long run. My opponent generally stands on a philosophy of voting no for everything, and I hope that I will be able to vote yes and find those
Thank you.
solutions.
Thank you very much, Ms. McClendon.
Thank you.
Next, we have candidates running for the state position in the 40th Legislative District. Can we have Jeff Morris please come to the podium? His opponent, Howard Pellett, cannot be here tonight. Can we have Kevin Ranker come to the podium? His opponent, John Swap, could not be here. So these two will present together.
We're going to debate each other.
I think they, no.
This is going to be tougher than the vice presidential debate.
Yeah.
I'm ready.
So this is going to be somewhat unique because you'll be responding to similar but not exactly the same questions. But each of you do get a 2-minute opening statement. Shall we start with Mr. Morris?
Great, thank you. My name is Jeff Morris, the representative from the 40th Legislative District, Position 2 in the House of Representatives, appearing here with and not opposing my senator from the 40th District. Efficiency starts at home, so we're appearing together to save time. It's been my pleasure to represent you down in Olympia the last 2 years. It's been really an unprecedented change in the scope and role of government. We've cut roughly about $12 billion in real dollars out of the state budget over the last 4 years. My area of specialty is in the technology and energy area. I'm very proud that some of the policies we've adopted the last 10 years have led to the clean technology sector being one of the few areas where we've actually increased the number of jobs the last 2 years during this recession. I was just over at a new wind farm in the Palouse, and for Whitman County, that construction was hundreds of jobs in the last several months over there, over $700,000 in new property taxes for Whitman County because of that one wind farm going in. I grew up in the San Juan Islands. I was first elected. I lived out at South Lake Whatcom here. This is a very diverse district. It's one that's easy to represent and that you let me work on really complicated issues. And don't expect me to turn out a lot of press releases to justify why these complicated issues are important to work on. So I look forward to the questions here tonight, and I appreciate the forum to come here and speak on these important issues that we face in Olympia.
Thank you, and I want to point out that Jeff Morris is running in the 40th District for Representative, second position. Mr. Ranker is running in the 40th District, Senator. Your opening statement.
Thank you, and thank you to all the hosts for having this event this evening, and for all the Western Washington students for showing up. Am I not speaking loud enough? I'm in a very calm mode right now. Sorry, I'll live myself up or something. So I want to say a couple words about kind of where I come from personally with regard to the issues that we're going to be discussing tonight. So growing up, my mom was supervisor for Child Protective Services down in Los Angeles and in San Bernardino counties. My very first job out of high school, and then for several years after that, my goal was that I was going to be a high school counselor, or at least a counselor, and I started actually taking on that role. With Los Angeles County Office of Education, I was responsible for high-risk youth as a counselor for the entire county. And I did that for almost 4 years, and it was intense, to say the least. But it also opened my eyes to a number of different issues firsthand, dealing with community needs, with homelessness, with drug and drug addiction, violence and gang violence, and so on. And many of those things are interrelated to so many of the government programs that now I'm asked to make a decision on, and I remember back upon those times and how powerful they were for me. I also was responsible for the daycare program at the Ocean Park Drop-In Center, which was a homeless shelter. And I was the one who took care of kids when their homeless parents went to look for a job, which was a magical experience, frankly, and also very difficult at times. I'm running for re-election this year for a number of reasons, but I want to point out one situation that took place this year that was an eye-opener for me, that really made it a black and white decision on kind of the difference between Republicans and Democrats in the Washington State Senate. The Republicans took control for the first time in many years this last year. And you know what? I'm going to tell this story in a minute because he's about to tell me 5 seconds. There it is. So I'm going to get to that because it's pretty important.
Thank you, Mr. Ranker.
I can follow signs.
Mr. Morris, the first question for you. We can all agree that low-income families continue to struggle to meet their basic needs, and the recession continues for them. Some say that Washington's current tax system fails to meet the growing needs of the state's most lowest income citizens. Would you support raising a revenue to ensure adequate funding for health, safety, and education? If yes, how?
Well, thanks for the question. During my time in the legislature, I actually have been voted for new revenues to fund these important programs. And I really feel like if people have a good sense of what the revenue is going towards specifically, that they tend to support those, even if they're challenged as an afterthought of the legislature's decision at the ballot blocks. I voted for the package that was overturned a couple of years ago because mainly the soda pop folks dumped $12 million into overturn the revenue package that would have been, I think, $1.6 billion in this biennium had it actually been upheld at the ballot. We had to come back and cut $1.6 billion worth of programs in these very important social safety net areas because that tax was overturned. Not only, I got 15 seconds, our tax system needs to be restructured, and I would support new taxes. Our tax system is the most punishing to low-income people out of all the states.
Thank you, Mr. Morris.
Can I give him 5 seconds of my time?
We made an executive decision not to do the rebuttal part of this. We'll just move to.
Don't want to rebut that.
We'll move to your question, Mr. Ranker. Of the 200,000 people living in Whatcom County, 30,000 of them live in poverty, according to the U.S. Census Bureau. We know poverty is inextricably linked to raising levels of homelessness and hunger for many Americans, and children are particularly affected by these conditions. What is your stance on the government's role, if any, in reducing poverty?
I think it's a priority for government. It needs to be a priority for government, and frankly, a greater priority than it is now. You know, I was in a debate with my opponent, not this wonderful gentleman, but another person who's running against me for the Senate seat, and there was this statement that we hear, it's a mantra now, that fund education first. That sounds really good, and frankly, we should prioritize the funding of particularly K through 12 and higher education. But the reality is there are many programs that are a critical government role that prepare the child to be able to be educated when they get to school. If they haven't been fed in the morning, if they haven't been fed in a day, they're not ready to learn. If their parents are having problems or other social problems are impacting their home, they're not ready to learn. And so I think that government has an absolutely critical role in funding these sorts of programs. And frankly, the devastating cuts that we've made over the last few years, we need to start rebuilding those back.
Thank you, Mr. Ranker.
You're welcome.
Mr. Morse, second question. If national health care reform, also known as Obamacare, continues to be implemented, states will have some flexibility in terms of Medicare expansion. Would you support and/or advocate to the governor for Medicare expansion in Washington State? Why or why not?
Well, thank you for the question. The answer is yes, I would. The simple answer is yes, and I could probably yield my time back to my senator here. I think it's the easiest because it's an existing pathway and program, and because we've kind of pulled back some of the state funding in areas akin to the Medicaid program, that it's the quickest methodology of an existing program we can expand with that flexibility to actually get health care to people who need it, as opposed to spending time inventing new delivery systems and eating up that money in process or through process and not through health care delivery.
Thank you, Mr. Morse. Mr. Ranker, your second question. In the 2009 state legislature, the state legislature committed to making the Early Childhood Education and Assistance Program, ECAP, an entitlement for 18,000 low-income preschoolers. As part of the legislative's effort to comply with the recent state Supreme Court decision to make better funds for K-12 education, would you support increasing funds to make ECAP entitlement a reality?
Yes.
Why?
Actually, on the previous panel, or two panels back, Matt Crow, I think, really articulated well the reasons for the importance of early childhood education, but the entire ECAP program is absolutely critical. Those first years of the child's learning is some of the most fundamental and will create the direction for that child's educational abilities for the next 12, 18, whatever years, however long they're in school. And so I think it's absolutely critical, and I think with the McCleary decision coming down, we need to make sure that we fund those ECAP programs and prioritize them.
Thank you, Mr. Ranker.
You're welcome.
Mr. Morse, your third and final question. The Emergency Food Assistance Program is a state program that supports food banks across the state, including 8 here in Whatcom County. Whatcom County food banks have experienced a 50% increase in client visits since 2007. If elected, what will you do to ensure that our state food banks are able to meet the increasing need for food assistance that they're seeing in our communities?
Great, well, thanks for that question. I actually learned quite a bit firsthand this last legislative session in Olympia because I volunteered at the Thurston County Food Bank during the week, during the legislative session, and I was really amazed about how that food bank in particular was able to do so much with so little resources for so many people. One of the things that impressed me the most that I'd like to fight for more funding for all the food banks across the state is that a lot of, as you know, I think we had the question before, a lot of children go home hungry. The best meal they get is at the school through the food bank program where they have a school lunch program that they run. Thurston County started to take home a backpack for the weekend so that the children actually had good food over the weekend when school was out. And they took that out to all the schools and so forth. I thought it was really an amazing program. I'd like to see how we can replicate that more. We've cut back in this area. We need to, as we get more state revenue in or we're able to increase revenues, put more money towards this program.
Thank you, Mr.
Thanks.
Morse.
Yeah.
Mr. Ranker, your third and final question. Nearly 1 in every 2 children in Washington now count on Apple Health for Kids for health coverage. Health coverage gives parents struggling through the recession peace of mind and provides kids with the care they need. But not all kids benefit equally. There are still 100,000 uninsured kids. What policy would you support to make sure all eligible kids have access to the benefits of Apple Health for Kids?
Well, whether you like it or not, money dictates the priorities of government. It's a harsh reality. So I think, and my seatmate said this really well, the reality, we have a horrible tax structure here in Washington State, which penalizes the poorest and the neediest in our communities. It's the most regressive tax system in the entire country. And so we need to look at full-scale tax reform, but we also need to look very specifically at different revenue sources. We have a serious problem as Washingtonians. Our revenues are quite low, but our expectations are high. So to continue to ask for the same of government in a program like Apple Health for Kids, which is absolutely critical, to continue to ask for an expansion on that, but not be willing to talk about an expansion of revenues is totally unrealistic. So what we need to do is we need to have a serious and blunt discussion about new taxes, about tax loopholes, and then also finding greater efficiencies in government and being able to move those monies from the areas where we're taking them from or raising them from into programs like this.
Thank you, Mr. Ranker.
You're welcome.
You now each have 1 minute closing. We'll start with Mr. Ranker.
Okay. I want to finish my point from the beginning then is, that's not funny, it's a good point. So this last session, the Senate was taken over by the Republican caucus for the first time in many, many years. And they did 3 things immediately. And I'm not talking days afterwards, I'm talking their very first actions. And for me, this was a huge eye-opener on frankly why I'm a Democrat and why that's important to me. The first things the Republican caucus did in the Washington State Senate, very first thing, was they proposed an additional $111 million cut to education. The Democratic proposal was 0. They were at, it was just under $100 million. The second thing they did, they killed the Reproductive Parity Act, which was the primary bill for NARAL and Planned Parenthood, which would have made sure that all of our insurance companies provided coverage for all of women's health issues. The third thing they did was they zeroed out all funding for family planning. zeroed it out, no funding. So for me, that opened my eyes. I'm adamantly opposed to those things. I will be a tireless advocate for women's
Thank
reproductive
you.
choices and equality.
Mr.
and I
Ranker,
appreciate your
thank you,
support.
thank you. Mr. Morris, you have 1 minute closing.
I'm going to try to wrap up some points on the other questions. I just want to share some facts because this is a good venue to get some information out that we don't normally get. We balance the budget really because of the way our Constitution is in the state on the backs of higher education and social programs in our state. We just passed Massachusetts. We're the 13th largest state in the United States. 15 years ago, we were the 17th largest state. We've had tremendous growth, and our tax system is one that over-rewards us during upswings and punishes us during economic recessions. We really need to examine our tax structure, but also we need to take a look at the balance we have in that. People don't realize that they're paying less than state property tax today than they did 15 or 16 years ago. We gave almost $1 billion back in 1997 in property tax relief that has never come back on the books again. And so that made us more dependent on sales tax, which hurt us even more now. I've got 5 seconds left. Looking at these questions, looking at life cycle cost for some of these investments in these social programs as opposed to the 2-year budget
Thank you.
would be the right direction to go, and I appreciate the forum. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ranker, Mr. Morris. Next, we will feature questions about Bellingham Proposition 1, the Bellingham Housing Levy. To speak for the proposition, we have Greg Winter, and to speak against the proposition, we have Jack Petrie. Welcome, Mr. Winter. Welcome, Mr. Petrie. You each will have a 2-minute opening. We'll start with Mr. Petrie.
Okay, have you ever heard of a book called Nibbled to Death by Ducks? You ever been bitten by a duck? It kind of tickles, kind of like a 22-cent per day tax increase. Small change, the home fund trumpets, just $80 a year. Nothing compared to the value of helping this long list of people. Well, I'm 3 out of the 4 things they list on their list, and I'm being nibbled to death by 22-cent ducks. And here's a few planned for our immediate future. First, Proposition 1, a 22-cent duck. A 1% increase in city property taxes, a 22-cent duck. An increase in water bills to buy land around Lake Whatcom, a 22-cent duck. Stormwater tax increases, water and sewer increases. Recent sales transportation tax increase. All 22-cent ducks. And don't forget, the county's getting its ducks in a row, too. Well, Bellingham's 22-cent ducks alone could cost a home like that, spotlighted by the Home Fund, $480 per year in extra taxes and fees. So an owner on an average Social Security check will have to pay all of January's checks, all of February's checks, and part of the March check just for the property taxes and fees. Duck. An example, between Social Security and both of us working, my wife and I are below median income, but we're not low income. We'll probably have to work into our 70s. Right now, every 10 years, we pay more in property taxes cumulative than we paid for our home. But at least it only went up 22 cents at a time. About 16,000 low income, very low income, and even extremely low income citizens are being nibbled to death by the same rapacious ducks that are chasing me. The Housing Affordability Task Force identified dozens of things we can do to improve affordability without a tax increase. Does anybody wonder why we haven't done those things?
Thank you, Mr. Petrie. Mr. Winter, 2
Thanks.
minutes.
Proposition 1, the Bellingham Home Fund, is based on the premise that everybody should have the opportunity to afford safe, stable housing and still have enough money left over for the other basic needs. It creates housing for very low-income families, seniors, veterans, and people with disabilities. The levy will be in place for 7 years and cost the average homeowner $6.89 per month, less than 25 cents per day. In return, the $21 million in local investment will be used as matching funds to attract up to $140 million in additional outside investment. The primary focus produces new housing for people in our community who need the help the most and provide services that will help them succeed in their housing. New developments supported by this fund will reflect our community's strong environmental values and sustainability goals and create over 200 construction jobs. Too many people cannot afford the most basic housing that's available today. The 400 households on our homeless housing wait list have average incomes of only $4,900 per year. Apartment rents are increasing at twice the rate of local wages. For very low-income families and for seniors and people who are disabled, this creates desperate situations. Using the existing stock of private rental housing will continue to be the cornerstone strategy of our plan to end homelessness, but it's getting much harder to respond to the overwhelming need for housing assistance when rent prices continue to outpace wages. As a community, we should want to prevent and end homelessness, not just because it seems like the right thing to do, but because homelessness is expensive. There are real costs to us when kids can't learn, when people with disabilities live outside and repeatedly cycle through the jail and emergency room, and when Bellingham's working poor are forced to the outer reaches of the county to find housing they can afford. When we invest in our subsidized housing infrastructure to prevent and reduce homelessness, we reduce these unnecessary costs so there's a positive return on these investments to the entire community.
Thank you, Mr. Winter. Mr. Petrie, the first question will be answered by you first, and then Mr. Winter. Question number 1. Opponents of Proposition 1 argue that this new tax will increase rents and end up making housing less affordable while doing little to stimulate job growth. Proponents of Proposition 1 argue that it will reduce rents, spur job growth in the construction industry. Please provide details of what you believe will be the real outcome if Proposition 1 passes.
I think the real outcome will be certainly higher taxes on low-income people who own their own home. About 1/3 of Bellingham's home supply is owned by low-income people. Rents naturally go up when taxes go up. Renters charge based on expenses. This, if you figure out how many people there are in the low-income brackets in this city, about 12 people will see their rents and home taxes go up for every one person's presumably helped by this levy. As to the construction is going to take place either way, but take a look, just for an exercise, go to the PDC filings for the home fund and see where the money is coming from. It's out-of-town construction companies that are donating money, out-of-town architects and others.
Thank you, Mr. Petrie. Would you like me to repeat the question?
No, thanks. Yeah, our opponents, and Jack and I talked about this on Saturday, would say that rental prices are going to go up, so renters are going to be hurt by this property tax. And there's no question that people that operate rental housing will have a small increase. So, for example, I looked at my neighborhood at a fourplex of 2-bedroom apartments, and I did the calculations based on the assessed value. Each apartment, the cost to the owner would be about $2.20 a month. So there would be a one-time increase to the owner's cost of that apartment. By their math, then renters' price would increase from $800 a month to $802.20 a month, and then presumably the rent would go down when the tax goes away in 7 years. We know that's not going to happen. What's going to happen is what's happened over the last 7 years. Those rents will go up at the same rate that we've seen rent inflation. Those $800 apartments will be $950 in 7 years, which has almost nothing to do with this small tax increase.
Thank you, Mr. Winter. Mr. Petrie, do you have a rebuttal? 30 seconds.
Yeah, Mr. Winter points out to a $2.20 increase. Okay, I listed 6 different things that are $2.20 increases per month per household. There are other things. The county has some things coming online. My own taxes, they've only gone up $2.20. That's the most ludicrous argument possible for this thing, because it's simply not a fair argument. If we raise taxes...
Thank you, Mr. Petrie.
Okay.
Well, I think it is a very fair argument because one of the things that's behind this proposition is the rental price inflation, and rental price inflation is related to what's going on in the larger economy, what's going on with the labor market, what's going on with vacancy rates, and the people who need the help the most will benefit very much from having targeted investments in our subsidized housing infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Winter. The second question you will respond to first, Mr. Winter, and then Mr. Petrie. In 2007, Bellingham and county leaders appointed a county-wide housing affordable task force, known as CHAT, to address the needs of affordable housing. You're both familiar with the task force's 6 recommendations, which they said were fundamental to the success of housing solutions and should be implemented as soon as possible. Do you think Proposition 1 is the most efficient and cost-effective way to achieve CHAT's goals and recommendations to meet this pressing community need? Why or why not?
I think there's 6 primary recommendations in the CHAT report. The one recommendation that would be most effective, most quickly for people who need the help the most in our community is a local housing investment fund or a housing trust fund, the same kind of a fund that Proposition 1 would create. And if you look at the executive summary of the CHAT report, you will see very clearly that the CHAT members used the Seattle Housing Levy as a model, which is the model that we used in constructing this proposal. And you'll also see that CHAT said that there was a great need for local matching funds to attract the outside investment so that we could build our subsidized housing infrastructure and respond to these local needs. And they clearly thought that this was one of their 6 strategies that should be used for people who need the help the most.
Thank you, Mr. Winter. Mr. Petrie, would you like me to repeat the question?
No, that's okay. Yeah, there's 6 primary recommendations, and of course we go first to the tax increases. Actually, there's 6 primary recommendations and a whole bunch of secondary recommendations, and most of them point the way to things that can be done to improve affordability at no tax increase. Things like streamlining permitting, things like an adequate land supply, which we have failed to provide. All sorts of things can be done that don't cost tax increases on the low-income people among us, as well as other citizens. Do you realize in Bellingham, 63% of all the households are designated low income? 63%. How about we get a few good jobs going? How about we do some of the many things that the CHAT report said could bring affordable housing at no cost?
Thank you, Mr. Petrie. Mr. Winter, 30-second rebuttal.
Well, as we've said to our opponents, actually before we knew they were going to be our opponents early on, we see great value in some of those other CHAT recommendations. If you look at the entire housing spectrum and the entire income spectrum, bringing down the cost of housing, all different types of housing may have some effect on housing affordability, but this proposition is about people that need the help the most, and that CHAT recommendation to create a local housing investment fund is really what's needed right now.
Thank you, Mr. Winter. Okay, Mr. Petrie, 30-second rebuttal.
Okay. Well, I think when you read the date of the CHAT report, it was 2008 or something like that, and it was a long time in the making. 2008, that's 4 years ago. We've had 4 years to start doing these things that can be cost-free. We haven't bothered to do them. We don't want to do them. It's policy. It's become our political policy not to do them. We just want to go for the money. That's what it's all about.
Thank you, Mr. Petrie. The third and final question, Mr. Petrie, you will respond to first, and then Mr. Winter. Research has demonstrated that the cost of homelessness can be quite high. Emergency room visits, incarceration, and police intervention all add up quickly, making homelessness surprisingly costly for cities and taxpayers. Proposition 1 is designed to help reduce the community's cost of homelessness, but it will also cost residents more in property taxes. Share your thoughts about the financial impact of Proposition 1 on taxpayers.
Well, first of all, I think this whole thing has been kind of dishonestly presented to taxpayers. I got my voter's pamphlet today. Proposition 1 will help very low-income seniors and a bunch of other people. Very low income includes the homeless and all these sorts of people. And then they mention the $5,000 income annually. Most of the money raised by this doesn't go to very low-income people. HUD sets up a hierarchy, low income, very low income, and extremely low income. Most of this money won't go to those people who are homeless. They're in the extremely low income. If I had my way, I might pass this thing if it all went to the extremely low income, but it doesn't go there. It goes to bureaucracies. It goes to $1.2 million in administrative fees. It goes to things that I don't approve of. And I'd rather see, fine, give the money to the homeless.
Mr. Winter.
Thank you. I think it's important to point out that two-thirds, by local law in the ordinance that created this ballot measure by our city council, 66% of the funds that will be generated will go to support people in the very low-income category. And I think it's also important to note that there's going to be a community development advisory board that already exists. There won't be any new bureaucracy that needs to be created by this. This will dovetail into that citizens oversight process, and that board will ensure, and the mayor and the city council will ensure, that these funds are focused on people who need it the most. I mean, why would the director of the Homeless Service Center, the chair of the Coalition to End Homelessness, and the people that I associate with in my professional life bring this forward if that's not what we truly believed?
Thank you, Mr. Winter. Mr. Petrie, 30-second rebuttal.
There's not much of a rebuttal to that. I mean, the homeless have to be taken care of. Most of this money will not go to the homeless. The extremely low-income citizens among us need to be taken care of. Most of this money does not go to the extremely low incomes. It goes to other things. I wouldn't spend a dime on so-called endlessly affordable housing as long as there's a homeless kid that still needs housing shelter. There's a difference between shelter and affordable housing.
Thank you. Mr. Winter, rebuttal.
Well, I think Jack and I both agree that the funds, if this passes, and I sure hope it does, that the funds generated for this should be focused on people who need it the most. And what I've been telling people is that this would be the most important homeless prevention program that this community's ever gotten behind and put together so that we can build the infrastructure so we can begin to actually get some traction on preventing homelessness rather than only responding to it.
Thank you, Mr. Winter. Now each of you will have a 1-minute closing, and we'll start with Mr. Winter.
Well, I was out canvassing a few weeks ago. A woman in the Seahome neighborhood said to me, do the math. This won't cost much. It'll be matched by millions of dollars in outside funding, and in the long run, it's going to save us all money. And then she said, besides the financial side of things, every religion that I'm aware of would counsel us to do this. And as for the people who would be helped directly by Proposition 1, one of our clients summed it up nicely. Ed's a veteran who had been homeless for a long time, and one day he found himself with nothing but a change of clothes and $8 in his pocket. Now he's attending college and working part-time. He attributes this huge turnaround in his life to the security of knowing he could go home to a quiet place to sleep and study. That's what Proposition 1 is all about, providing the security of safe, stable homes that become the foundations for recovery and prosperity for families, seniors, veterans, people with disabilities who are struggling. We invest in their future because we will all share in their success.
Thank you, Mr. Winter. Mr. Petrie.
Okay, Prop 1's not about affordable homes for Bellingham's most vulnerable populations, but I've talked enough about that. But here's a fact. We don't make housing more affordable by making low-income households poorer. We just force more people into poverty. The consolidated plan, the draft plan, shows nearly 50% of our low-income householders somehow struggle by each month and avoid the cost burden household definition. How good does it make you feel to add hundreds of dollars each year to their housing costs? Proponents speak of the 1,300 homes helped by Proposition 1. Well, how about the 3,100 low-income householders working hard to just get by every month and somehow succeeding. Doesn't anyone care about them? I know, beyond doubt, every single one of you is doing your best to serve the truly vulnerable. How does adding to the housing burden of those financially on the edge achieve those goals you hold so dear? I think human service professionals should be among those Bellingham voters most likely to vote no on this.
Thank you, Mr. Petrie. Mr. Winter, Mr. Petrie, thank you for speaking tonight.
Thank you.
Well, this concludes our candidates forum this evening, and on behalf of the sponsoring organizations and coalitions, I'd like to thank our moderator, Trula Nicholas. And I'd also like to thank the candidates for taking the time out of their busy campaign schedules to be with us tonight. And most importantly, I'd like to thank you for showing up tonight to remind us of the importance of these issues to us and our communities here. So thanks again for coming. Please remember to vote, and safe travels home.
I belong to a lot of organizations, but the League I really like because they promote civil discussion.
They're not knee-jerk decisions. It's big picture thinking in the League. Actually having conversations about issues where they don't necessarily agree.
I think my vote, personally, my individual vote is worth far less than the impact that I have on others who come to me and we discuss the issues and really engage in a meaningful fashion.
They broaden their perspective so that they're able to see more eye to eye and come to agreement on points of values.
I can impact so many more people. I can impact the community. And I think it's a chance for young people to see themselves as part of their generation as a community who's going to be defining the world that they're going to be living in.
The results of elections are what determines what goes on in our country, in our state, in our local government. It's the only way we have to really voice what it is we want from our government.